What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Couple Things,
With Shawn and Andrew.
a podcast all about couples.
And the things they go through.
This is a top 5 interview for me.
What?
This was fascinating.
What'd you like so much about it?
Just most fascinating couple. And most
No, say the word fascinating.
fascinating.
There it is.
Their dynamic, everything they've gone through, how they support each other, the boundaries and lines they've kind of figured out in life. He's also maybe one of the most fascinating human beings I've ever met. But to see their dynamic in person was so cool. I was so inspired.
So I kind of live dual lives, right? Like all of the content that we post mostly is me and dad mode. Right?
Yeah.
But there's also this other side of me that like the athlete, competitor side.
Yeah.
And that's how this interview came to be. We're sitting down with Ken and Shelby Rideout. Ken Rideout is a dog. He's a dog. He's over 50 and he runs a 2 hour and 28-minute marathon.
Yep. He's also done ultra marathons. He's
a world champion.
He's a guy that like no challenge is too hard.
So I was super curious. You got a guy like that. What is his wife like? And Shelby,
she's a boss.
She's a boss.
She is a boss. It is really cool. Their story, I don't want to give up too much because it's all within this interview, but we talk through what has shaped them into the couple that they are. We go through some really like heavy traumas, addictions, drugs, just rough upbringings that have brought them closer together and how they've kind of found their outlets in life to make sure that they stay, straight arrows.
I think there's going to be a part 2 to this because
there has to
as
be.
soon as we cut the cameras, they were telling their story about adopting their daughter, Tensei.
Yep.
So they have 4 kids, 3 boys and an adopted girl from Ethiopia who is Tensei. And it's just an amazing story in and of itself. So we're excited to hear what you think. But background, just so you know, Ken, aside from being this amazing like endurance athlete, he grew up in Boston, as you'll probably hear from his accent. Took up boxing at an early age. Then he took a job as a prison guard. Okay,
Yep.
so he's he looks like he's a rough around the edges kind of guy, which we address on the show.
He took up a job as a prison guard at the prison where his stepfather and brother were incarcerated.
So then he goes and works on Wall Street, making tons of money. They talk about that and what that's like. And now he's like kind of walking into this limelight of celebrity. And
we talk about his major substance abuse, how it was hidden from his wife, pretty much their whole relationship, how that came out, how he went into recovery, what changed his life, how they support each other through that.
And what I love about this couple is that they're both amazing. So Shelby herself is an educator and an ASL interpreter, so she does sign language.
She also has her own app that you all need to check out called Bright Signs Learning for teaching your children how to learn sign language.
That's right, and it's only $4.99. So yes. I feel like it's a pretty Shawn. Actually, that's one thing that you increased urgency of in our family was like just learning sign language. I just think it's kind of cool to learn any new language.
Absolutely,
and we'll link information on that down below. But here's what I love about this couple that was really refreshing for me is a lot of the people we interview do a lot of interviews and they write a lot of books and they have their shtick and it like this is kind of what they do. It's like they are YouTubers or they are authors. But Ken and Shelby have lived this whole life of things. And like they've just got engaged and immersed themselves in life. And now at like a later phase in life, they are sharing their story publicly, which is it just makes a different dynamic. It's like more, you'll hear the tone and the whole, I think, conversation is authentic, not to be cliche, but just really unique. And I'm a big fan of Ken and Shelby. So thank you two for joining us and giving us the time. Glad to call you friends. And again, if you want to learn more about Ken and Shelby and what they're up to, Shelby's TikTok is hilarious. So you should check that out. She does these story times with like frogs getting stuck in the wall. Anyway, check it out. We'll link information down below. Without further ado, we bring you Ken and Shelby Rideout. How many shoes do you think you have?
Hundreds.
What? See, I'm like I want 3 pairs of shoes, 1 for running, 1 for working out, 1 for
Brother, I have 4 pairs of shoes in constant rotation just for running. But I run like 70 to 100 miles a week.
Oh my God.
But why do you need more than just 1 pair of shoes? Burn them out and then rotate.
No. They need to be wearing equally at all times because when you're running that many miles, think about how many miles 100 miles a week is.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
average of almost 15 miles a day.
Okay.
So if they start to wear slightly, it alters your gait, and that kind of distance with a slight gait alter will F up like a hip, Achilles. So if they're all wearing around equal amounts all the time, I just rotate them through. And then I have like shoes for running fast, shoes for like recovery. Did you have multiple gymnastic stuff? Like this is a job for me. It's like a profession.
Yeah. We like the only kind of similar situation in gymnastics is like grips.
Yeah.
Oh, that you wear on the bars. And I would have 3.
Yeah.
But it's painful because like you basically have to start over.
Mm-hmm.
So you have one that's like completely worn in, one that's like 75% worn in, one that's like 50, and then you have your new ones, which are a nightmare.
Wow.
But that's why I have been able to win the races like this Gobi Desert race that I just did.
Congrats.
Thank you. Is because I treat this like deadly serious. Like the same way you trained when you were in the NFL, that's how I treat running. There's no compromise. It doesn't take a backseat to anything. It's like my priority because it's not just somewhat of a career. It's also like my mental and physical health, which is the most important thing in the world to me. Without it, I'm no useless to anyone else.
I would say you'll be disappointed. My very first half marathon, I was like so excited, barely trained at all. Went and bought a brand new outfit, brand new shoes. I was like, I need the whole new
That's
get
what
up.
matters.
Put them on the start line. It was one of the worst days of my life. It was horrible.
Why?
Oh,
well,
'cause
maybe
I
was the
didn't
lack
train.
of training
I had
part of
blisters
it.
everywhere. My feet were hurting so bad. It was just miserable.
But that's what you would expect of me if I tried to go do gymnastics and you're like, come on, we'll do back handspring. And I'm like, I'm pretty athletic. Look, that looks very doable. And then you break your neck and you're like, well, what were you thinking?
Wait, we were down on the beach recently at my parents'
Oh
house.
my God, I
and
almost
he
killed
went
my
for a
son.
walk with our youngest, who's 7. And he comes back.
Hold
and
on.
he goes,
While we were walking, he did about 20 back handsprings with me spotting him. He's super athletic.
Nice.
Hold on.
He's 8.
Ken's background in gymnastics, you may be asking. Do you have experience spotting back handsprings? No, he does
We
not.
did about 20 back handsprings in the sand with
So
me
he comes
spotting
back
him
and
with
he
2 hands.
goes, hey, Cameron, come on, show everyone your back handspring.
He's soaking wet.
I did gymnastics back in the younger years. No, like wrong entirely. Cameron goes back and literally just lands like
On his
scorpion
neck.
on his neck.
Oh.
I
and it
was
was-
mortified.
Yeah. So he was super embarrassed. But at the same time, I'm like, what were you thinking? Where's your gymnastic background? What are you talking about? We're on the sand
when he
and
landed-
everything. Like he's never done anything.
When he landed, he just turned 8. He might have been 7 at the time. When he landed, he goes, "You suck, Dad."
He was right. He was
just
right in that
straight
moment.
fear.
Do you laugh like that in the moment, or is this like a? Oh, no, you
No,
gotta
on that
get-
one I
yeah.
didn't laugh because I
Yeah.
thought I broke his neck. I mean,
Yeah.
it was terrible.
Yeah.
It was. I was mortified, and it was in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Because him and I were doing them by ourselves. I'm like, damn, dude, that's really good. But he went to wrestling for the first time. He takes jujitsu like 4 or 5 days a week. Like he
That's
trains like a maniac, and he's good. Like I have 4 kids. I know when someone is good and not good. He's good. He went to wrestling. He was doing pretty good. They were warming up. They were like, all right, guys, running around, cartwheels, forward rolls. There's like, 30, 40 kids. All right, guys, back handsprings. I'm like, back handsprings? Like all these kids are going to do back handsprings? And they just start flinging themselves over. And sure enough, he's out there trying. He couldn't really do it, but he's like kind of like flipping himself around.
Crazy.
But if someone said to me, all right, do cartwheels, back handsprings, I'd be like, yeah, back hands, pass.
Yeah.
I wouldn't break my neck.
And as a gymnast, that makes me cringe. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay. I would not want to just yell at 40 kids, be like, throw back handspring.
Well, these kids, half the kids were doing it. I mean, they weren't very good.
It's
but
impressive.
And speaking of why that wouldn't be a bad idea, there was a kid named Jamie Nieto. You ever heard of him? He was an Olympic high jumper doing backflips and like back handsprings, backflips. Did one, landed on his neck, broke his neck.
Like after
Paralyzed.
he was doing the high jump, he was just being funny on the track and kind of like to celebrate or to be silly, did it in paraplegic. After.
So what's the moral of the story?
Don't do back handsprings if you don't know what you're doing.
Unless you're doing it to your 7-year-old son on the beach.
Yeah.
All right, how'd you guys meet? I'm curious.
Are we recording?
Yeah,
We
we're
are.
live.
Oh,
baby.
cool.
We're just-
I was going to say this is good material. It should be on the show. Do you want me to tell the story?
Well, I'll just say from my end, I was 30, living in New York, And it was one of those where you're like, okay, really got to meet more people. And just friends.
This is before Hinge. And
Yeah.
Match.
And I'm very outgoing, but I'm an introvert, so it's very easy for me to like just hang in. And so I was like, no, I'm going to make an effort. And so this guy I went to high school with, who's a year above, called me and was like, he would call like every 6 months, when he was in town. Hey, I'm going out with a bunch of people. You should come out. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to go out with a bunch of new people. Showered up, ready to go. Left him a message like, just tell me where you guys are. And if I don't hear back by like 8, I was like, okay, I'm shutting it down. I'm watching Seventh Heaven and I'm going to bed. Like, end of the road. And he calls and he's like, where are you? We're still, whatever. I'm like, oh, are you still out? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, is there a bunch of people still out? Or, because I thought it was going to be dinner and stuff. And he's like, yeah, I'm here with my friend Ken. I go, there's one dude.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a bunch of people, like a thing. And he's like, no, come on. And it was way downtown. It was so like inconvenient. It's not normally I would have tucked it in. And I was like, nope, I'm putting out like good vibes to, spice things up. And I go down and it was Ken.
Dang, that was like your first
foyer
out.
Hit it out of the park on the first one.
Well, I had mentored this young kid who was a sophomore in high school when I was running a trading desk in London in this group called, and long story, but this kid did an internship with me like between his sophomore and junior year in high school. Obviously like a real overachiever. He went to Cornell, super nice kid. And they had this program where you could pay someone to get you an internship in like finance, fashion, whatever. So he went through this program. So when he was telling me this, we were sitting on the trading desk and I was like, we should start our own business like this. You just find people internships. I'll find all the jobs. You handle the logistics. Long story short, he did it. While he was a senior in high school, he ran this program and had kids staying at the Juilliard School of Music in New York in the dorms during the summer. And one of the activities was like weekly or nightly speakers. So he asked me to come and speak, which at the time I was like, oh, I would have rather like been thrown off a bridge than speak publicly, especially to a bunch of high school kids. But anyway, I went there, and one of the other guys who was my age went to the high school where this young kid went, where Shelby also went. So the guy who was on the panel with me was Shelby's year and age. And he was like a talent agent or and he booked models and stuff. So he's like, oh, I have a bunch of models that I represent. We're going to a party downtown. Let's go. I was like, hell yeah. Like Shelby, I was single. I was like, I have got to get out. I've got to go out. And we went down there and we get to the bar and he's like, oh, this is my friend Shelby. I'm like, when are all the people coming? And he's like, oh no, I think it's just Shelby. And I was like, cool. Do you mind if I ask her out? And he's like, well, I kind of invited her for myself. Oh. And literally he went at one point. So we're talking. I tell her he goes to the bathroom. I tell her what happens. And long story short, we ditched him. While he's in the bathroom, we just left. So the guy must have been like, whoa.
Well, that was after a while. We went to a couple places and then he was like, Ken had already asked me out.
Regardless of how long it was, in the same evening, he went to the bathroom and we left.
Wow.
He was doing his own thing at this kind of like club where you can't hear anything. I was like, he's fine.
Did you go to New York for modeling?
So I actually went to Vanderbilt here.
Go Doris. Let's freaking go.
Yeah. And got my degree in education. But I always wanted to be an actress. So the deal with my parents was like, we totally support you. Once, like when I was little, I like wrote a note like, can you get me an agent? And they don't talk to me, just write me back. Yeah. They never did. I'm like, did you get my note? And they were like, we want you to be a regular kid they sort of like said, when you're 18, we're totally, that's great. What they really meant is like post college, that's really great. Yeah. So I went to Vanderbilt and I was born, like my passion is really kids and being with kids, and that's very natural. So I was not born Audrey Hepburn. Didn't prevent me from being like, dude, I want to do that. Like, so I was a decent actress. Went to Vanderbilt, got my degree in education, special education, and I focused on the deaf. And then I moved to New York to wait tables, or I actually worked with kids to support myself at the time. And then I was doing acting, but that led to a lot of like print modeling and regular modeling. But it took me years to be like,
why specialize in deaf?
So I think it's sign language is very theatrical, and there's a lot of performance in your face and stuff like that. So I think that probably, I always loved special ed. I always liked working with special needs kids since I was little. And so senior in high school, I was working at this oral, you could do an internship your senior of high school, and I worked at this school that was an oral school. So it was deaf kids, but you weren't allowed to sign. You had to work on your voice. And there was this little Japanese kid whose parents were Japanese. He was deaf. His parents spoke Japanese. He was living in America and he was deaf. And he went to a sign language class in the morning or school. And then he came to this oral class. So I was handing out snacks and he started to sign more. And I was like, okay. And started to give him the snack. They're like, no, he has to say it. And he was sitting there doing the sign going, ma, And I was like, oh, but I understood. Like, I don't care how you communicate, whether it's through words or sign. And so I just then got into sign language and stuff. But I moved to New York and was like, I'm going to do this. And did print modeling and commercials and kind of went as far as I guess. And I went to LA with it and stuff. But then there was a strike and I went back to school and then became fluent in sign language. And then did all of that.
So I have a brother that's a missionary, and I feel like mission-oriented work is really hard because it's like there's more passion and purpose behind it than like, hey, no offense, but like, the more material, like, let me go make a lot of money working a desk wherever, right?
Oh, we can come back to that. I know.
I know. Y'all got stories.
I get caught up in that life, but we'll come back to that. Go ahead.
But it's hard because that's the beautiful aspect of mission-oriented work, but there also, I feel like, so often comes with it like this disappointment, or like you talk to like a social worker, a lot of times it's like, oh, it's this dread because they can't make the leap from their goal of helping people and like whatever red tape or societal infrastructure, like whatever. Has that been hard for you as you've navigated this world?
A little bit. Yes, because it's actually I wanted to increase my skills again. And so starting last week, I contacted a company here and was like, hey, do you need interpreters? And so they sent me to a school with a little guy who's they're like, when they called me, they said, we don't know how much he can even see. He's really low vision. He's low cognitive and he's deaf, or he has cochlear implants. So he actually can hear more than you think. And it's so difficult because they pay a certain amount, so they mainstream him into some classes for like social studies and science. And it's like, he's not getting any of it. It's even signing wise, I was like, ooh, this is a little challenge. They're like reading and highlighting 5th grade stuff. And it's just low. And so I'm like, but he could do so much. Like when he had one-on-one, he did a one-on-one last week. I was like, that was so great. It was like, but the government will only pay for so much. So they mainstream him so then they can pay for other things. And it's sort of, so you just sort of look for those moments and those pockets where you do see a difference.
Wow. Is it fulfilling?
It's very fulfilling. I love it. I love it. And just kids in general. And we have an adoptive daughter, and we tried to adopt again for many years, and it didn't. We moved to Nashville 2 years ago, and I said, listen, I'm not ready to shut that down, even though like we're old bags. I was like, I said, so we literally traveled with all the cribs, all the strollers and everything. I'm like, I just need to wait. And I feel like I'll just know, like God's going to lead me. I just need that door to close, but it's not closed yet. So he came and I was like, maybe we're supposed to foster. And that I find that world is really difficult. That one. And I don't know it well enough. So I looked and I was like, I still have 4 little ones. And the biggest need is for teenagers. And that's a tough one because there's a lot, even in adoption, we saw it where you adopt a 3 or 4-year-old. People are thinking, this, like some people have this savior mentality, like I'm the savior, I'm saving you, which is not really the right outlook, right? I mean, Ken and I will both say, we feel like we got the bigger gift from our daughter, but with foster care, people go in it very naively and they think, oh, great, they're going to come here. I'll just, flood them with love and everything will be great. You're like, no, there's a lot of trauma, even at 2 or 3 or 4. So then you get a teenager and their life has not been what you hoped for them. And so they come and I'm like, I just don't. And so that part's really disheartening to see.
So the door is still not closed for you guys?
No, we're old farts now.
I think if
for adoption,
I think if we could adopt newborns, that they would keep them in our natural birth order of our own children. I would probably take 1 or 2 more.
I would take. Oh, are you opening up?
Once you have 2 or 3 kids, I feel like 2, 3, or 6. It's like you're in it. Like it's not like the oldest is now old enough to like help out with stuff. Like they're at the age now where we can leave them alone for an hour or 2 if we want to go eat. So now I feel like we're like through the woods. Yeah.
Except the issue now is then you have basketball and you're in all these different directions that
the
you would
schedule
just
tonight is insane. Yeah, there's like we had to have someone else do one of the pickups.
Well, we would carpool with somebody.
Yes, there's practice all over the place. Every night, all 4 kids.
I will say that's been a conversation we've had recently. This will be our 3rd.
Yeah.
And I know I'm done with pregnancy.
Okay.
I'm done with like our personal biological children. I was like, but if you want to talk adoption, like let's start opening up a new door.
It's the greatest.
Because
it's the best.
If you're willing to take on children and be a parent, there's so many people who need it. But I'm curious, when you adopted your daughter, did you struggle at all like within your marriage of trying to figure out I feel like a lot of people are afraid to say it, but having the ownership over a child, of feeling like they're yours.
No, I never.
That part of it was never. We were on the same page with everything. The minute they handed it to us, it was the same. And we've had 3 biological kids. It's the same as if they pulled her out of Shelby. It was like, as soon as they handed it, it was like, oh yes, here's our daughter. And that's even when I look at her now, like, yeah, she's different, obviously, but I don't see the differences when I look at her feet. Like when you look at your kid's feet, you're like, those are kind of my feet, and Shelby, those are our feet.
Yeah.
I do the same thing with her. I'm like, they're kind of like my feet. Like it's literally like there's no difference to me in the difference of our kids. They all get yelled at the same amount. They all get treated the same. Love and anger equally across the board. I mean, sometimes too much anger for me. But.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a choice, though, relationally, you have to make as a couple going into adoption?
Yes. And I have heard through many people, I feel like in general, and this is a generalization, but it's easier for women to be like, yeah, of course, that's my baby. That's my baby, even if it didn't come from me. Men, I know it was a biological thing, but they're more with their seed, dropping their seed around. That many men have a harder time. And so when we had a home study where they come into your home and see that you're okay, and the woman was telling me that she's been in ones where it's very obvious that someone's on board only because the other person kind of dragged them there. And she's like, that's really difficult. I said, how do you do that? Because that's not and she's like, well, you just sort of write it in the report of saying this seems to be the sense, you know. But you have to, it's anything, same thing, people getting pregnant or not. Like you both have to kind of be on board and talk about what your roles are going to be. And
I always think about how difficult it is having children. As you know, you're like, I'm done with having kids, right? Imagine people who have unplanned pregnancies at a young age. Like we had our kids I was 40 and I still was like, I mean, even now I'm 52. I feel like I'm really not qualified for this job. But when I see people who are like in their teens or early 20s and they have an unplanned pregnancy, I'm like, I couldn't imagine. Like it was like, who's getting up with the baby tonight? And thank God that was Shelby's calling. But
what do you
even
mean, who?
Little things like that, it's like people just, when I see people having unplanned pregnancy, I'm like, they have no idea what's about to hit them, the tsunami of responsibilities, right? It's like the kids can't do anything, can't eat, poop, nothing without you for 24/7 for like 5 years.
Dude, that first baby, you can't even go to the bathroom yourself. Like it is. And then you think about a single mom
It's
who's
insane.
got like that gets crazy real quick, and it's like humbling to think,
Hell yeah.
oh, I think I'm whining right now because of my situation with my freaking mother-in-law who's helping and it's like, oh, I got no room to complain.
I will say there's no question in this, just a side story. We were so inspired. We had a young couple here who are in their teens when they accidentally got pregnant. Like never intended to get married. They were just kids. And
18?
I think they're
17 or 18, yeah.
And they were the most inspiring, mature, probably 20-year-olds at the time.
They're still young.
They're still 20. And they've gotten married and they've made it work and they go to counseling and they have this beautiful baby. They're trying to get pregnant again. And I was like, wow, the world could learn a lot from you guys.
Well, there's 2 ways you could, approach that situation. Either, hey, realize that you're about to walk into a tsunami of responsibilities and say, I got a lot to learn. Let's start right now. Or run away from it. And honestly, I think about adoption and fostering, and it's a bit of like, I don't know if I have the courage to like, it's like, it's complicated and feels really difficult.
Nah, you could do that. You could do that. It's like anything. You're just like, I'm doing this.
Yeah. And I think when you work with a lot of kids too, I think that you would, sometimes like, oh, did they get from there? Or is that biological? Or is this? It doesn't matter. This is, those answers don't matter, whether this is given to them, like it's the nature versus nurture thing. And I think both exist. I think nurture is bigger than nature. And I think just being an open person, and almost in a way, because you don't necessarily have a background as well as your own backgrounds for your kid, you're more open. Like, I don't know, maybe she's going to be a great singer. Where if it's me, I'm like, no, probably don't have any talent. Where you sort of cut off things using, or, they're not going to be very tall, or they're not going to, because you know the history. When you have a child that you don't have as much history, in a way, you're more like, the world is your oyster, because I'm not putting subconsciously like limits on what I think you can. You hope not to do that anyway, but it is, you're a little bit more open, like, oh, let's see how you flower about and what comes out because it's kind of like a surprise.
I love that mentality. Like a treasure hunt with
Yeah,
the kid.
yeah.
It's fun.
Talking about nature versus nurture, I hope you don't mind me asking. You've talked about how you had a rough upbringing and the nurture side of it. How do you still process that as a grown adult of working against your upbringing and making sure it doesn't go on to another generation?
That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it, so don't feel uncomfortable asking, because that's part of like my story and who I am, and I hope other people can learn from this. But even as a child, part of the reason, and I've shared this in other interviews about my upbringing, is from my earliest memory, I recognized that the way that the people I was living with were doing things wasn't right, and that was my motivation and inspiration to get the hell out of there. So I look back at that and be like, yeah, I know exactly what not to do. And that comes with a lot of emotional baggage, and that's part of the reason why, I don't know if this was on the camera when we were talking about On-Site, why I went to On-Site and
What's On-Site?
Trauma Healing Center, which at the time going there, I was like, I don't have trauma. I just know that I could be happier. I could have more peace in my life. Not necessarily happy because I'm happy, but I could do without some of the periods of turmoil, internal turmoil. Anyway, so I went there and I was like, I don't really have trauma. We started doing the work, and after like 2 or 3 intense full-time days, I was like, the woman was like, we're going through all this stuff, and she's putting little signs up on the wall as we're going through. There's a lot of like, we're using a lot of tools and stuff. And she's like, if I told you your children had to deal with this, would you think that they had trauma? And I just like melted down. I was like, I would never tolerate this shit happening to my kids. But to your point, that stuff motivated me of how I didn't want to raise my own children, and kind of formed the motivation or the impetus for me to want to build my own family with Shelby that was more about what I wanted, what was missing in my life, like a family built on love and respect and trust. And I'm far from great at being a parent, but I try to create the house that I wanted when I was a child, and tried, I'm always trying to do the best, but we're like quite the dichotomy. Like Shelby's very soft and loving and nurturing, and almost like at times like
I have good
think
discipline too.
Too
I
gentle
can
and
tell.
coddling
No,
with
are
the
you kidding
kids,
me?
where
I
I
am
come in at times,
cool.
and I come in like a bull in a china shop, but way too far to the extreme where I'm like cursing.
Oh,
And
yeah, because they'll say like a 7-year-old's like, oh, come on, cut the bullshit. I'm like, Ken,
Yeah.
he's 7. I mean,
yeah. So, but I don't know. And then they're like, we don't tolerate them using bad words, and they'll be like, Dad, but you use bad words, and I go, yes. That just shows that you have a complete lack of command of the English language, and you have no other words to fill in, so you're using curse words. It shows complete lack of intelligence. And they're like, you curse all the time. I'm like, yes, don't be like me. You have no excuse. I'm raising you the right way. So yeah, it's been my upbringing has been a big motivation for me wanting to create the life the childhood that I missed out on for my own children. And for the most part, we've done it. Like I said, I'm far from perfect, and there's a lot of things I can improve on, but doing things like going to On-Site, hopefully I just continue to try to work towards being the person that I want to be. And I'm far from that, but I'm closer than I was yesterday.
So I'm really excited about this conversation, and have been, because you I think, are like that David Goggins type, Jocko, like, you're a hard man, like you're freaking.
I don't see myself like that, but I
wait,
get the
really
comparison.
quickly, he came home the other day from lunch, and he goes, I got to tell you what happened at lunch. I go, what happened? And he goes, I was walking to the table, and there was 2 girls having like a girls' lunch, and the one woman turned to the other one and goes, "That's a man." And I go, "Oh!" And he goes, I heard her. And Ken's the type not to just pretend like, "Oh, I didn't hear it," and kind of smile. He turns, he goes, "What? Oh, thanks."
I just gotta clarify. She goes, there were women sitting in South Hall at the restaurant, and she was like, "That's a man." And I turned and I was like, "You just made my day."
Yeah.
And she goes, and she said to a friend, "That's what a man should look like. Polished, cleaned up, like just together, just in shape, just like good job." She was not being inappropriate. She was just like good work. And I was like, I feel like if I see someone walking by who's dressed nicely, I will always say like, I love your outfit. That's awesome. So to me, I was like, thank you. You have no idea how much that meant to me. But yeah,
it's so interesting. Like we're still getting to know each other very much so, but like I do group you in that realm, and it's like to hear you talk about love and trust. You know, here's this East Coast guy who's into boxing, was a prison guard. You're talking about love and trust. Like those things don't always go hand in hand naturally in my mind of like, hey, I'm going to go freaking dominate this race and love and trust. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you mesh those two things? And it's like, what I'm curious about, and I hope we could dial in throughout this conversation is just like, you said we can do this when it comes to the parenting and adoption. It's like, you have the mentality with everything. I'm like, how do you, there's an element of marriage that I think taps into that mentality of like, we can do this better than you can as an individual, which is why I think this aspect of a team is so powerful. You have this person who knows all your weaknesses, who still says you're capable and like, you can do this. But it's like, in what areas of your life are you applying that to, and in what priorities, right? Like, because you can do this for sure. You can do a thing, but you can't do everything.
no.
And so like, what is that balance when you're talking ultra marathons, 4 kids, you know what I'm saying? You have a freaking high performing job too. It's like, how?
Well, I would say that a lot of the persona and the hard guy stuff might be a bit of a defense mechanism for how genuinely sensitive and emotional I am. Like I've cried on multiple interviews, like not uncontrollably, but I wasn't able to even like tamp down the fact that I was getting emotional. And I like Jocko and David Goggins, but I don't have that. I'm not, I feel like I'm not as like, maybe to others I am. I don't feel like I'm that aggressive, like, with let's go, let's kill. In my mind, I am when it comes to my own stuff. But I just feel like with this Gobi Desert race is an example of like how my mindset goes. Like I saw this race. Someone said, I'm doing this race in Mongolia. 6 days, 155 miles, self-supported. I'm like, I've never run with a backpack. I've never slept in a sleeping bag. I have no outdoor skills. I have no man skills at all. Like I couldn't change the door hinge. Like it's not my thing. I don't like it. So when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, that makes me so uncomfortable. And at one point, Shelby even said like, yeah, you always talk about doing things outside of your comfort zone. So, this could be a good thing. And I was like, F it, I'm doing this. And literally, we were like, I don't even have a backpack. I got to start trying out backpacks. I just got backpacks, loaded them up with water and bottled water and towels to like, I didn't know anything. So I just put 20 pounds in a backpack and started running with it. And immediately I was like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? This is like next to impossible. I'm running 10 miles a day with a backpack. I've got to do 25 a day in 4 weeks because I signed up 4 weeks before. But at some point, I was overwhelmed with nerves and scare and anxiety. But then I was like, you know what? I'm doing this. I'm here. And I was telling Todd Anderson and Katie Hoff the other day, our mutual friends, that as I was getting on the plane, I was like, again, like going to onsite. I was like going to the electric chair. I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like there wasn't a moment of like, yes, I'm going to Mongolia. This is going to be awesome. I was like, what the hell have I got myself into? Everyone is watching. Why did I do this? I'm gonna be so embarrassed. The minute I was literally, as I was walking onto the jetway of the airplane, I could feel my mentality shifting of like, let's go. We're gonna kill everyone. We're killing them. We're winning. Because I had friends. Rich Roll said to me, and I told Rich this, and I know he didn't mean it, but he was like, dude, be careful. That's a hard race. It's claimed a lot of ultra runners. Someone died there once. And I told him on a show, I was like, as soon as you said that to me, I was like, how dare you think that this is too dangerous for me? And another friend said, it would be great if you could get top 5 there. And I said to him, top 5, I'm winning. I'm winning that race. He goes, come on, dude. There's people there that this is all they do. And there were. but I killed him.
That comes off hard, just so you know, man. That's pretty aggressive. Like, I just want you to know.
Yeah, but I just
which is
told you
dope.
I was scared to death inside. I was practically laying in my tent crying the night before. I was like, I didn't sleep. I was like, what have I done? Oh my God, it's pouring rain. I'm in the desert. I hate sleeping in a tent. I'm a baby. I have to stay at the Four Seasons. Like,
he
I
is.
can't stay even at a crap hotel.
He's very bougie.
I love having Joey. It's
Yeah.
freaking
Well,
awesome.
I'm curious like you said, the dichotomy of you guys'
We're
relationship.
really different. Well, our values
Yes.
and all of that is the same.
Yes.
100%
But
the
our
same in
upbringing, I always joke around. So when I was 16, 17, 18, I worked at an ice cream store,
Yeah.
scooping out ice cream with 50s music on.
Yeah.
And Ken was working in a prison as a guard.
Yeah.
So in that regard, our outlook is a little bit, so I'm like, everyone is good unless you prove to me you're bad. And I have a pretty good judge of character. He thinks everyone's bad until they prove to me that I can, like, then they have to prove or earned that they're good for me. So it's a little bit different that way. And I can't really change that because that's his experience with
That's a
how he
good
grew
point.
and what he's seen. And my experience was, and it has suited me well. I mean, I do have a good judge of character that you can kind of, but so it's like, at the same time, he's deep down, like, more positive. Like, I'm the type where if I'm going to do a race, in my mind, I'm like, I want to win. I'm not going to tell anyone
Yeah.
until it's over and then I've won.
Yes.
And then if I don't, no one has to know anything happened here. He's like, I'm going to tell everybody. I'm going to kick ass. I'm going to win. I'm like, oh, God. You're setting yourself up for, like, this major Well, I think about people like you and Katie that go on these national stages and people, I'm like, they're supposed to do this. They're going to be great. And you're like, and you're little kids. And that's so much pressure that is it you're someone who can perform under pressure or you don't? Or how do you rectify that in your mind? You know what I mean? Or closing things off and just being able to zero in.
More compartmentalizing. But the what I'm curious about, like, the dichotomy of you guys, because for me, it was definitely compartmentalizing. I would shut the world out.
Yeah.
I could turn it off in a switch.
Yeah.
I'd walk into an arena. The only thing that existed was, like, the equipment and
That's
myself.
amazing.
I couldn't hear people, nothing.
She's a stone cold killer, bro.
Back
Yeah.
in the day.
Yeah.
Back in the
No
day.
kidding.
Not anymore.
It's crazy.
Not anymore.
But-
Not since babies.
But again, even reflecting back on my life, I had a wonderful upbringing, everything. But within gymnastics, there's so many, like, traumas and things that you go through. I'm curious of, like, that mindset, that switch that you're able to turn on. Like you said, you're walking onto a plane and you're like, I'm about to poop my pants. I cross the threshold. I'm going to go kill him. That's a mindset that is very hard to learn unless, one, it's a coping mechanism of this is how I learn. Like, this is my life. Do you think that's something that you learned as a kid that just became your way of coping with life? Or do you think that's just like an innate thing that people are born with? And do you see it in your children? Or is it different because their upbringing is different than yours, where it's in a loving household and it's more safe?
I think that I learned this late in life going through addiction and just being so disgusted with myself. And at some point I was just like, I am not accepting mediocrity in my life. I will not be a loser. And because I had been, in my mind, a winner through high school and college. I played hockey and football in high school and college and had, not at a high level, but high enough relative to my peers that I felt successful. Like, I played 2 sports in college. I'm doing this. No one in my family had gone to college. My peers and friends went to college. But so then to go through addiction and just become so, like, full of self-loathing and disgust and being everything bad that I would project onto others that were going through their own struggles, that at some point I was just like, F this, man. I am not going to live like this. I'm taking control of this. And even when you were describing just the mindset, flipping the switch, walking into the arena, I could feel my body, like, having a visceral reaction of, like, yeah, it's time to go. And my partner on the podcast, Teddy Atlas, he would always say, like, fear is like your friend. You think it's there to threaten you, but it's actually there to tell you that it's just time to perform. It's time to get ready. Fear is like normal and healthy. If you walk across the street and there's a car coming down, you should feel fear, right? And it's just telling you that it's time to react. And how you react is like the saying, the coward and the hero, the only thing different is how they react. They both feel and experience the same things. So everything that I would feel all the same normal feelings that everyone feels it. But at some point I was like, nope, I refuse to yield to that. I'm in control of how I react. And I'm telling you, I'm going to empty the tank and I will die to win. And I don't want to die. But when I'm running and racing, I've left races in an ambulance more than once. And I just feel like when I'm there, again, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to kill myself. But when I'm there, I'm like, no, it's all or nothing. I'm emptying the tank. They're getting everything. You cannot beat me without killing me.
Does that come from a place of like inspiration or like love of like, I love running, I love competing?
No.
Or is it like a darker place?
I think it's a darker place. I think for me, it's a darker place for sure. And but it's definitely like a coping mechanism to cope with what's the things that were missing in my life. Like no one does drugs. Initially you do drugs and you like the way they make you feel, but eventually you do drugs to escape the way you feel. Because I could tell you, like right now, if someone was like, hey, let's go get high, I'd be like, it's going to be awesome for like 2 hours. And then I'm going to want to kill myself. And I don't want to die today. So the running for me becomes, it doesn't get me high, but it occupies my mind and it gives me some purpose and it gives me something to channel my energy in outside of work. Like work is called work for a reason. It's not called fun. It's work.
What
But
were you about to say?
I was going to say, when he's talking about all these things and he made a decision, that would be the nature part. The nurture part. The nature part is he has 2 brothers. And since he was little, one of my favorite stories is he had brothers like 10 months apart.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Was in the prison that Ken served as a guard in, not at the same time. And they went to go, their mom signed him up for like welfare camp. They go to get on the bus. His brother runs away. And
We're like 7 years old
Yeah.
in downtown Boston. He runs away from the bus. I'm on a school bus with all these inner city kids. I had like a soda wrapped up in tin foil. I don't know why I remember that, but I was like, what is this, insulation? And he runs away and I was like.
And Ken didn't want to go to the camp either. Like, we have no urge to go here. So they finally capture the brother, whatever. They
This is
bring
in the
them up.
70s, by the way. I'm like one of like 2 or 3 white kids at this camp, and it is not like inclusivity, equity, and diversion here. This is like, give me your sneakers. And I was like, you ain't getting my sneakers, brother.
So the mom comes and they're like, okay, his brother ran away. So the mom comes, they're like, okay, you can take him home. And they're like, Ken, you can go too. And Ken's like, I didn't want to be at this.
Hold on. I've been there for 2 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they drive him up there, and they call me into the camp counselor's office. And my mother's there, and my brother's there, and I'm like disgusted with the whole situation because it's like a sports camp. So I'm excelling there. I'm like, you know what? I love it. As a little kid, I was really good at sports. And then in high school, like the kids who went to the pros, they just pulled away.
Yeah.
But as a little kid, I was like on par with guys that were like NHL superstars. Like all my peers were like huge NHL players in time. So when I was there, I was like, I'm just making the best of it. 2 weeks though. But 2 weeks
But
when
they
you're
offered
like,
to take him home. They said, your brother's going, you can go too. Ken's like, I didn't want to stay, but I was like, screw it, I'm not quitting.
yep.
And he stayed at the camp. I believe you got camper of
Yep. I'm on
Camper of the week.
Nice.
No, camper of the year.
camper of the year.
Stayed there
But there's
to my
that.
whole
Like, what
2 week
makes
sentence.
you? That's a mindset at 7,
Yeah.
and he is just really different than his family. So to me, there's something that, and I have another friend, and me being interested in children, you see kids, you're like, there's just something with this kid that they have a drive that I can't explain. You know,
Is pushing yourself to this point of discomfort, like, is that just feeding into this like selfish like desire to compete, or do you do it to learn lessons that you carry over into other areas of life, like marriage, parenting, and career, or like why continue to teach yourself?
I have an answer that
I'm
may be
super
separate
curious.
from
Well,
his as the wife.
I could make an argument for any of the scenarios you were just suggesting. I could make the argument certainly that I'm incredibly selfish with some things in my life. No question about it. I can also make an argument that it's like from a place of love and like respecting myself and giving my body what it needs to like stay sober and continuing to live. I think when people talk about aging, it's like once you hit it, people make this assumption that at a certain age you're just like, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm like, why should I feel like that? I don't feel any older now than I did at like 30. I just feel like, maybe I'm a little more sore occasionally, but so I don't know. I think that there is certainly a lot that needs to be examined with my therapist, which I do every week, but you know.
What I was going to say is that I think it's changed over time. So when we got married, I was 33, he was 36. We actually, when our first night meeting, I said, or he said, do you want to have kids? I was like, I want to have 5. I want to adopt. I want to give birth. And so he was like, me too. And so when we got married, we started both right away to try the adoption process and we were having trouble having kids. Long story, unexplained. We did 7 in vitros, 3 miscarriages via in vitro. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Totally thrown in. Anyway, went to Ethiopia, got our daughter. I stayed in Ethiopia for 2 months and he had to come back to the U.S. to work and I was just taking care of our daughter. And he was coming to visit for Thanksgiving. And I was like, I know this sounds crazy. Will you just bring a test? I'd never been pregnant on my own. So I said, will you just bring a test over? I'm like that. I'm that story. And so he brought a test and I was pregnant. And so all three of our boys I had my tubes tied. The last time I was like, no, I only want another baby through adoption. And so all 3 boys were natural, but I had 7 in vitros and 3 miscarriages. But when we got married, he started doing these triathlons and that was he always kind of ran and worked out, but he started to do triathlons and all this stuff. And it was a very selfish pursuit at that time. And he also was someone, you talk about like the tough guy and the man. He is, but what I love about him is some of the tough, he's like that typical, like very hard on the outside, but a really soft center. And so he was always willing, he's open, wanted to adopt. He's always been open to therapy and all that kind of stuff. But each person has their own journey. And so he'd be open to it, but he just was never really getting there. So he kind of hid behind running. And he had a therapist once that said, he's like, you are literally running from your problems. And he was like, huh. But it was still years later. Like it just, you go through, then he would drop that therapist or whatever. So he was kind of very selfish. And for me, being with kids is easy. So I could have 4 kids and he'd go out biking for 6 hours. And I was like, oh, this is no.
Oh, that's huge.
But it almost enabled the behavior because I made it so easy. And then I would say like, okay, well, when you come home, at least then be on. But then he was tired. He just biked 6 hours. Or then he would want to talk about bikes and go on the computer and look at bikes. And I was like, no. Like, I'm being so awesome right now. You can go do that for 6 hours. This is fun for me to be with the kids. But when you come home, you have to be present.
Yeah.
And he really wasn't. He was still deep into just kind of hiding behind and getting all this adulation for how he was doing. I would say now it's very different. Now he is much more present and he's had a lot of therapy and gone to on-site. And so when he was going to go to the Gobi Desert, a friend of mine was like, how are you always cool with him doing all this fun, cool stuff? And I'm like, because when he's away from it, he literally on the way to the airport, be like, what am I doing? I miss you guys so much. And then I'm like, he's going to go across the desert, be suffering. I'm going to look amazing because it's his own form of therapy. It was almost like he did on-site. You have little slides back, then you come back up. You know what I mean? And then it was almost like a check-in. And so he went to Gobi Desert and you have nothing to do but think and and so he comes back and he's like his best self after, which is different than how it was before. Before it was just more selfish. And I would say now his runs and goals that he has for himself in these athletic pursuits, it's much more of a full... And it's more about wellness and that kind of thing than it was originally.
There's like a layer of intentionality of like, hey, I realize I can't go to the Gobi Desert every month.
Right.
But like I'm going and here's why.
Yeah.
And here's what that's interesting.
I have a thought. This is more of a thought than a question, but I'm curious what you think of this. I feel like we talked to a lot of like athletes, even like Eric Decker was on the show and we talked about this, of how there's an obsessiveness needed to do what you're doing, to do what professional athletes do, to do what parents are doing. And a lot of athletes really struggle with it when they leave their career because they don't know how to rechannel obsession. It can turn into addiction. It can turn into unhealthy habits. But there's this really interesting process that I feel like few go through where they relearn how to use their obsession in ways that they know stays within their boundaries. But usually they only learn that because they go outside of it and they fall victim to using the obsession in the wrong ways. So whether it is addiction or whatever. I know with me now as a parent, I have to work really hard not to tap into obsession anymore. Because as soon as I tap into it, I take it too far. And so I always have like these little triggers of like, oh, that's going a little too far. I have to rein it back.
That's great that you recognize it.
It's taken a while.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as a spouse and as like yourself, Ken, how do you encourage someone else listening who has this ability to obsess, which I think we all do, how do you encourage them to find their limits of not taking running too far to where you're running past, like running from your problems?
Mm-hmm.
And as a spouse, how do you help support them and be like, I actually think you're going to the desert for the wrong reason
Mm-hmm.
and not for the right one?
Not enabling them.
Yeah.
Right, because I did.
Yeah.
I did enable in that sense. Yeah.
So what changed with you?
Yeah.
Well, you get to a point of frustration because it was almost like a parent-child role where I'm like, you're an adult and I don't want to be I don't want to be the nag saying, can't go do that. I don't
Yeah.
like that kind of a relationship for a husband and wife where I'm saying, you can't go there, you can't do this. But at the same time, I'm like, you're not setting those limits where you're like, no, I have a friend whose husband was out of the house a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to say you can't go out.
Mm-hmm.
What I want is for you to say, no, I've been away a lot. I kind of need to be home. And so I kept thinking any normal person is going to recognize you're taking this too far.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were sort of in it. And the problem became he didn't even realize how good he had it.
Mm-hmm.
I think he does now.
Wow.
Like my younger brother goes, dude, how'd Ken get how did he get how?
Well, you know what I said to him? I chose the right partner. I chose a partner that would support me and that was complementary to my life and would give me the life that I wanted.
But
and
it was
I could
too
give
much.
her the
It was
life
too
she-
much.
Right, but there is a lot of intentionality around who you marry and why. And I would say that when I met Shelby, at least from my perspective, I was like, this is the person that I want to have a family with. This is the person I want to raise my children. This is like, she was exactly what was missing in my life. And it created, I think the two of us together, while I don't think that we're perfect, I think that we've created a great dynamic for our kids in the sense that they get a exposure to a huge spectrum of emotions and personalities between the two of us, to say the least. But
back to your point, or it was one of you, of how do you as a spouse support that or not support that, and with your whole podcast of communication and stuff. And there was one time something happened, I can't remember what it was, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, how do I want to approach this so that he doesn't get defensive? Because I really want to have a conversation, and he sometimes is like, how do I get this conversation to end? And girls I just want to talk it out, and he just wants to say, and I'm like, don't feed me a line, I want to have some
I'm
resolution.
always like, cut to the chase. What's the answer you're looking for?
So there
I'll
was
just
one
give it to
day
you.
I wanted to talk about something. Again, I don't remember what it was. And I remember I said, okay, I'm going to take a pause. And I was like, how would I approach this if it was my son?
Mm-hmm.
How would, probably different than I normally approach Ken. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Where's the balance?
Mm-hmm.
And to my son, I might say, hey, I was thinking that, gosh, it just seems like, my tone and everything was different. So I spent the morning just thinking about it. I'm like, wow, that's funny. I would approach it differently. So I went into an office. I said, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something. I was kind of thinking, and I just did it in a way of like, how would you speak to, not a child condescendingly, but how would I do it in a way that's not your spouse? We talk to our spouses sometimes different. And it was the funniest thing because before he even answered, he goes, can I just tell you, Shelby? He's like, the way you just approached that. And so the first thing before he answered me was to say, you just came to me. That was the best way you've ever approached me with anything. And I go, that's so funny. I was pretending you were Jack. So I've gotten better sometimes at saying, I don't have to say something in the immediate. Like even recently, I was doing a lot of stuff with the kids. And I said, you know what? I was sort of doing, yeah, don't worry. I'll take them here. Oh, I'm doing this. And so finally I started to like get irritated. And so I said to him, listen, it's not your thing because I've said I'm going to take them, all these things. But I do realize over the past couple of days, seems like we're a little out of balance. And he just goes, yep. Okay, I hear you. And that was it. But I thought about it beforehand versus like just being like, dude, I'm getting irritated. And just said, let me just approach it differently and say, I just kind of thinking the balance seems a little uneven.
But to your point, what you were saying about what I would tell someone who feels like they might be moving towards an obsession, I always like have a practical, like matter of fact approach to things where at some point, like when I was training a lot for triathlon, I crashed my bike one day and went in an ambulance to UCLA. And I just remember her coming to get me and my head's busted open. I'm covered in burns all over my body. I crashed going down to Mescal Canyon in Malibu and literally stopped under the bumper of an oncoming car. Oh, I mean, it was a mess. I was like going like 35 miles an hour. The guy behind me was having a panic attack on his bike. He was like, oh my God. When I jumped up, I was bleeding everywhere. I jumped up, I go, how bad is my back? My friend Jack McDowell from the Palisades group, and he goes, oh my God, it's so bad. And I looked at him and I go, dude, lie to me. Lie to me. Tell me it's not that bad. Blood's gushing. But when she came to get me, I was just like, that was one of the turning points where I was like, this is insane. Like I have too much to like live for to get hurt on a Saturday riding my bike in Malibu. But so to your point though, I feel like I always take a matter of fact approach, even with myself, where I'm like, at some point I'm always like, all right, I got to cut the shit. Get a grip on yourself. Look in the mirror and recognize that this is getting out of alignment. And,
but I will say, when he went to onsite, one of the things he really, like the Gobi Desert, he doesn't really know a lot about stuff before he goes in and jumps in. So he's like, I'm going to onsite.
Do you think that helps you?
Huh?
Do you think that helps? Is that like a benefit?
Maybe it's fear of like learning too much and then backing out of something.
Yeah,
It's almost like even though when I was going to the Gobi Desert, when my tent got delivered that I was going to sleep in, I put it together the day before I was going to the desert, and I was like, I think this is right. Meanwhile, I'm going with people there that have climbed Mount Everest. They know everything about equipment. I knew nothing.
Yeah.
What was I just saying?
Something about not looking into things before I go.
Oh yeah. So when he went to onsite, he was the phone started to become a thing where he would be on the phone a lot and stuff. So when you go there, they take your phone, and he exercises every single day. And so I was like, oh, I wonder how that's going to work, whatever. And so he didn't know. And when we got there, they're like, there's no gym. You can't really go walking outside or anything.
I would go crazy.
But what's funny is those are, as healthy as they can be, they are also, even still, it's an escape. Yes. Oh, I'm going to go do this. It's relieving, or I'm going to go on Instagram, or I'm going to. So when they strip all of that, and there's a reason they do that in those places, because I got to strip everything away, that you can't fall back on your comfort addiction of working out. Because, I can work out now, my feelings feel better. No. You're going to be like almost crawling out of your skin. So the only thing left now is to share it with your therapist or cry or do whatever, which I thought was the most effective thing they do there, is like stripping all that.
That's what I find so fascinating though about like even reading through your guys' bios and your relationship and kind of watching your interviews is I feel like we, to a certain extent, have a similar relationship where just polar opposites. We do things differently. He's definitely more extreme. He'll sign up for anything without ever preparing to a certain extent. But I have friends of mine who are like, I would never let my husband, or I would never let my wife. And I'm like, but he's a better husband because he gets to go do these things. And I think that obsession to a certain extent is a good thing because you learn what keeps you to be a sane human being and a good partner. And having those outlets is really important, but it's the staying within boundaries and lines that gets really hard because obsessions take over.
Well, he signed up for the Ironman. No, he qualified for Ironman in Hawaii. So there was a lot of training, a lot of things. His goal to go to Hawaii.
Dog.
So he goes to Hawaii. I take at that time we had 2 babies, not realizing, there's a time change. So I was up at like 3 a.m. every day with these babies, and he's trying to do all the fun things and stuff. And he goes on to do the day, and we're there cheering. His father and his father's wife, Leslie, are there, and he comes on the run. I have it on video, and he comes up and he goes like this, like cut the camera. And it was sort of, I don't know how many miles in you were.
Like 3 miles.
Like 3 miles into the run.
26-mile run.
I'm like, are you okay? You hurt? And he's like, no, I'm done. And I knew he was quitting. Like, now granted, I'm not the one doing it, but when you see, we're like, you're in a quitter.
Yeah.
And dude, we have flown, like you've put all this stuff in.
You felt that.
Yeah, I felt it. I don't know if I've ever told him, but I remember being like, you quitter. And I was like, are you sure? Just start walking. Just walk. Yeah. Like, because I also knew this was a big agreement to do this. And I had the babies and he quit. And he's never quit anything since because he's like, he just sat with it. And so there was another time he did great at the Ironman after. Oh, so that was the one, it was going to be a one and done. So we're supposed to have this great Hawaii trip. We go to California. And we're supposed to then chill out as a family. And he's just caught up in the fact that he quit. He didn't finish. And so I'm trying to enjoy a glass of wine. Now I'm over it. Like, hey, that was it. Oh, well. And he's like, and he's just being a sourpuss. I'm like, here's the thing. It was supposed to be shut down. And now this is family time. And now and he was just obsessed. And he's like, so finally I said, okay, if it is that troubling to you, you can try again. But we will have a contract and, X, Y, and Z. I will say this was at a time he didn't necessarily follow a lot of the rules of the contract.
You had a contract.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote a contract. And he said, well, why? Really cutely, he was like, why are you letting me do it? Like, that was my choice to quit. And I do think I need to do it again. but I'm surprised you're letting me do it. And I remember saying, well, because there's going to be a time that it's going to make me cry, where I want to do something. There's going to be a time where I'm going to want to pursue something, and I'm going to need you to take a heavier load of the kids, or do so, and that's going to be your time. When I ask you, you're going to support me. And so this is that important. I will support you, and when it's my turn, you'll do it for me. You know.
But this was that race was a critical turning point in my life. Like when immediately after that, I was like borderline suicidal. I was like, what a loser I am. What a loser. I can't
But that's
believe
also
I
not
showed
healthy
up.
thinking. You think about that.
I'm not done. I don't disagree. I was like so caught up in this because to me it was like just qualifying was the win, and I had just like discounted like actually performing on the day. It'd be like qualifying for the Olympic team at trials, and then you get to the Olympics, you're like, I already won. I'm here. And as soon as that happened, what I realized was in the immediate aftermath is that quitting at anything is so much harder than suffering. And that's to your point about the ambulance and emptying the tank. I know the sting of failure and quitting, and I will never, ever feel that again. I will never. Same thing with drugs and addiction. I'm like, I'm done with that. I've done that. That doesn't work. It doesn't work for me, and it shouldn't work for anyone. Quitting on your own, by your own free will, shouldn't be acceptable to anyone, because it's so much harder than persevering, because that sting will live with you forever. You'll never, ever get rid of that feeling. So now the only way I can cope with that feeling is to know, like, okay, I did that, and talk about it and let other people know, hey, learn from my experience. Trust me, you'd rather walk 26 miles than quit. Because I did go there one year and walk. And I went back the next year, had a really good race, did it in like 9 hours and 30 minutes, something in that context. And then I did it in 11 hours and 16, but I had pneumonia like 3 weeks before. And I was like, if I have to, I'll just walk. But I did. But I was like, I'm not quitting. I'll be
And the
dead
reason
out
he
here.
quit the first time, I should make this clear, it wasn't like, oh, I'm really tired. He was quitting, and I knew at the time, because he wasn't doing as well as he had wanted.
Yeah, so
that
I was
the
like,
time
I'm
wasn't going to be
like
great.
basically, like,
That's
I'm out
why
of the
he quit.
money. I'm just going to drop out. Like I was a
Yeah.
professional athlete.
Yeah.
And I was like justifying it in my head, like, shit, I'll come back next year and do it better. And then I was like, what am I doing? I was walking back with like crying just by myself. Like, I couldn't believe I was doing it, but it was like I was having like an outer body experience. But the point is, like, you know, hopefully if anyone's listening to this, they can learn from that experience. Like, never quit, never give up on yourself, because it's so much harder to live with yourself if you've given up and you didn't have to.
It begs the question or the thought of like, don't start what you can't finish, and like you can't start everything and finish everything, right? So it's like, be really intentional and thoughtful of like, I need to do this for whatever your reason is, and like, if you're gonna start it though, take it to the end. And yeah, I think, go ahead.
Well, and I'm still fascinated. You casually just throw out there, we have a contract about this. And some people I'm sure will listen and be like, that's a little much, but I don't think it is.
Oh no, but yeah.
I think
my sister's done contracts with her kids.
Yeah.
Saying like, here. Now, what I will tell you about it, and this was Ken at the time, I stand by the contract. It was like, to him, it was sort of a joke. Like,
yeah.
And I do a lot of like, you know, I'm like a teacher at heart. So like, all right, we're going to have a contract. And I do it with a sense of fun. And like, but just so we're clear, like, and he really
I love it.
He didn't really follow the contract.
Yes.
It took me a little while to get to the point we're at, where everything is balanced now. Like,
Like, yes.
if we go skiing, I get up at 5 and run before we go skiing, so that my running doesn't interfere with anyone else's. And sometimes it does, but I try not to let it, because I like what I do, and I don't want it to interfere or cause resentment at our house. So I try to work it in around what everyone else is doing. When we're going on vacation, I get up super early and do it. And it's just, I was talking to a friend today. He's like, yeah, I'm going to try to get up and run tomorrow. I go, dude, don't try. Just do it. What are you talking about? Try. If your meeting's not till 8, like, getting up at 5 isn't that crazy once in a while.
Well, and I brought up the contract because if people think it's extreme, I think they're failing to recognize that you guys don't say that you haven't explicitly said, like, we have this process of how we protect our marriage and stuff. It's just woven in between your relationship of, we know we do things extremely, which not many people can like do what you do, but you figured it out in such a beautiful way of the communication and preparation that you guys put into each decision is something that a lot of people fail to do. And it's not until they're a year or 2 years or 3 years committed into preparing for an Ironman that the balance gets swayed so badly that they can't come back from it.
That's right.
Well, and it's like you said, well, how as a spouse do you keep someone in line, someone who can be obsessive? He was obsessive the first time around going to Ironman. I was like, he doesn't know. So it was like, okay. And the contract was like, you know, after you work it, then you come home and you're present with the kids. You're you know, and it was almost like that's your answer. But as the spouse, I was like, okay, well, I left him to his own, and he didn't set up boundaries. He didn't recognize this is not. So I'm going to kind of say, I don't know if I was pregnant, but I did have like rub my feet once a week. That never happened. You know, I put in some fun ones and I thought maybe those didn't happen, but it was because he didn't know the boundaries. So I was like, okay, well then I guess I'll have to set them.
You use the term you enabled Ken, or I thought. Have you ever feel like enabled Shelby in anything?
I'd love to say I enabled her to any bad habits, but she doesn't have any. When I met Shelby, she had never done any drugs.
I didn't then start once I met him.
But had never seen drugs.
No,
and coming from,
I saw pop.
I had worked in a maximum security prison for 4 years, had struggled with addiction, had gone through like hell and back, like with my own lifestyle of like, I mean, I grew up in an aggressive place with aggressive people. There was a time where for a year or two, like in the senior year of college and next year out of college, where I don't think that I went out with my friends in Boston and someone didn't get into a fight. Which seems so crazy now thinking back, because I'm not looking for fights, but these people were so aggressive that when I met Shelby and saw what her family was like, I was like, oh my God, this is the life this is what's missing in my life. This is how I envision raising a family. So to say we came from two like polar extreme backgrounds would be an understatement. It was like worlds colliding, but it worked because I think that we balance each other out a little bit, and that she gives me a little bit more squareness and I give her a little bit more edginess.
Were you an addict when you met?
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me.
Wow.
I was a functioning drug addict for like 10 years, 24/7, round the clock, on opioids, year round the clock.
How did you get out of it?
At some point, I just like was like, I can't do this anymore. I went to like NA meetings. Well, it wasn't like a switch. It was like a process. So the first time I got out of it, when I was living in London, I went to NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and went to like a 12-step program and just got sober. And then I'd have like, a month or two of sobriety. Then I'd be like back to being high. And then when I met Shelby, I was like kind of in the throes of it again. And at some point, I went to an outpatient detox where they give you some drugs to help with the withdrawals, because withdrawals from opioids is like, man, when I meet other addicts that have gotten off opioids, it's like kind of like meeting someone from The Biggest Loser, where you see someone and they're just huge, they're completely out of shape, and then you see them a year later and they've got abs and they're a bodybuilder. You're like, how did you do that? That is incredible. Good for you. That to me is like getting off opioids. That's what it represents. Is like so hard, because you don't just get sober and a week later you're like, oh man, I'm so glad I'm sober. You're talking like months, if not a year, of like these like lingering depression, because you've shut down all these like chemical systems in your brain, because the things that you bring normal people joy, like seeing your children, going to an amusement park, whatever. I was getting that high 3 or 4 different times a day, so that those natural highs didn't exist for me. It was just dull. So for months after, it's dull. And you have to have blind faith in yourself that little flicker of light at the end of the tunnel is actually daylight. And if you just keep going, it's going to get better. And at times it just feels like the tunnel's going down and the light is not even visible. But you have to just have blind faith in the process, just like running. It's like if you trust the process, every day isn't going to be good. But if you do the work consistently, day in and day out for a year, 2 years, 3 years, just like gymnastics or any high-performing athlete, you have to trust that consistency is part of like the 10,000 hours. You're going to get there. And that's how I viewed my sobriety, is like, I will get to the end of this tunnel or I'll die in this hole. And I went to an outpatient detox. It was horrible. It's embarrassing, but I hope in speaking about it, and I've only spoken about this recently in the last couple of years because it was so embarrassing. I was like, I would rather die than have someone know the truth about me, that I was a loser. And When I went to that outpatient, they gave me a bunch of drugs like blood pressure medication, Ritalin for the day, Xanax at night, because you're a mess. I mean, I was like, if someone had seen me without those medications, they'd be like, oh, dude, I think this guy's dying. And I got up one night to pee, and I hear Shelby calling my name, and I wake up, and I'm like, oh, my God, I just blacked out. I mean, I don't faint. And those things like that, just those instances keep piling up and contributing, adding to like the ledger of like, the pros and cons. There was nothing in the pro, and all the list of cons was like, a mile long. And at some point it stuck. And but again, it was like a process, and I just kept consistently trying to stay sober. And, it hasn't always been the smoothest ride, but at the end of the day, like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, I can't believe I'm sober. Thank you, Jesus. And other days I'm like, oh my God, I would do anything to get high right now and escape the way I feel. But I remember like if I'm trying to lose weight or someone's trying to lose weight, I feel like if I eat this, how am I going to feel in 10 minutes? Because when I'm trying to lose weight or trying to eat good, I'll eat dessert and look at Shelby and I'm like, why'd you let me eat that? Sarcastically. And, that's how I just treat it, as like, what am I going to feel like in an hour from now? Because this high is only going to last a few minutes. And then it's going to start going downhill in a hurry. And I'm going to be like, oh my God, I can either get high again in a little while or just get through this dull phase and get back to baseline.
I got chills. I've never heard anyone describe addiction like that. That's wild.
Oh, I couldn't imagine a worse fate. You'd rather go to prison.
You use the term like you were embarrassed because you felt like a loser.
Oh man.
But like, is that how you view addicts?
No.
Is it like a weakness or
no? But I'm only passing judgment on myself. That's unacceptable for me, for my body. Like the way I take care of myself, it's unacceptable for me to abuse my body. This is like the greatest gift in the world. Look at what it's done. We know each other because I run, because I've accomplished these things. You know who I am. To disrespect myself and then tear myself down, and it is so shameful. Like I'm so lucky to have all the things that I have and to be healthy. To make myself purposely unhealthy for a few moments of like euphoria is so selfish.
Wow.
But I don't think of other people as losers. As a matter of fact, when I see people that are addicts, I want to help them. But I also know from being an addict, you can't help people who don't want to be helped. If someone calls me and says, hey, I need help, I'd do anything for them, even a stranger. And anyone who's a recovered drug addict would. But that doesn't mean that I drive by addicts and be like, look at these dirtbags. I say like, oh, these poor bastards. They're going to eventually get it though, and they'll get it. And if someone needs me, I'll help them.
And there's that aspect of pity because they're just like surface level. It's like that they're chasing that short high.
They're sick.
And you've experienced that short high and also this longer term joy or meaning or your purpose in running and that high, and you're saying you prefer the latter.
Oh, look at me. I'm here talking to you guys like two famous podcasters. and for what? You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I'm luckiest person in the world. Look at my wife. How much I've got 4 beautiful children. I'm the luckiest person I know.
But not everybody who's an addict can be like, oh, I'm going to stop being an addict because maybe I'll be like Ken Rideout.
Why not?
You know what I'm saying? Like,
why not?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Well, I could do it. I wasn't a good athlete. I was a Division III athlete. You played in the NFL. I'd kill someone to play in the NFL. I would have done anything to have been in that position. And then I've talked to guys who played in the NFL that are like, yeah, but I never made a Pro Bowl. I want to smash them over the head with a microphone.
No, I don't feel that way. Just don't let them smash me in the head.
We have that argument a lot. He's like, oh, but I didn't get what I'm like. You played in the NFL. Stop.
Anyway,
I appreciate the way you describe that though, because we've talked about this a lot. I have been very open. I've struggled severely with eating disorders. I went through a really long phase of where I was severely addicted to Adderall, and it was within like the outskirts of my career. And I remember so many times when you're not in it and when you haven't experienced that to a certain extent, it's so easy for someone to say, just stop. Just stop. And it's like, well, I don't even know how.
That's right.
And the way you like describe the emotion, the depression, the roller coasters of it that come with it, it's like once you finally get out of it, if you're lucky enough to get out of it, it's like I will do anything in my power never to go back there. It sounds great every once in a while, but it's like, no.
But to that point, don't you feel tempted some days if you're tired? You're like, oh my God, if I just had like 5 milligrams of Adderall, I'd be so productive right now. But what I find is with Adderall in particular is it creates literally a psychosis. And I start to act, if I'm not regularly abusing drugs, like if I took Adderall tomorrow, I would notice that I'm a crazy person later in the day. Like, and even I can recognize, I'm like, why am I so upset about this?
Yes.
I'm crazy.
Yes.
And that's when I was like, okay, I can't do any drugs.
Well, and it's even interesting too, because not too long ago, maybe a year ago, we were getting ready to move houses and stuff, and we had found like a prescription, and I was like, "You need to like get it out of the house right now. I don't want to see it. I don't want to know it exists. It needs to be burned." And he's like, "Well, I'm so proud. Like we should like to a certain extent memorialize this and like show it." And I'm like, "I cannot." Have that near us.
We've had opioids in the house where I've said to her, I'm dumping these down the toilet because I am going to take these.
Yeah.
I had C-sections and stuff, and I would just,
And they were there, and I was like, I have to dump these. And she's like, really? I'm like, I'm going to take these right now.
Like,
or
really? I was like, yeah,
I'm going to
dump
dump these, or I'm going to take these, or I'm dumping them down the toilet because I can't look at them. I can't know that they're here.
But like you said, it's unless someone wants help, there's no hope for that.
Because it's an impossible task without 100% commitment from yourself. So to think you're going to bully someone or guilt them into doing it, you're being naive. They will put their addiction ahead of their most prized possession, their family, their loved ones. I mean, look at people like destroy their whole lives for drugs. Drugs at that level of that kind of addiction that I was dealing with takes priority to everyone and everything. And it sounds crazy to someone who hasn't gone through it. But please believe, go drive through San Francisco or Philadelphia or New York and look at people whacked out on fentanyl. Do they look like they're happy? They've abandoned all sense of self to chase getting high.
But you're saying human willpower is stronger than that. That's the only thing that might be stronger than that. Is that right, do you think? If you have to have the desire to quit, and that desire, let's just call it willpower.
Oh yeah, if you don't have the willpower, no. You have to want to get sober like you want to live. Like it's like if you don't want to get sober, like imagine if I'm holding you underwater in a pool, and for a minute or two you think it's funny, oh he's clowning, and then you realize he's not letting me up. How hard are you going to fight to get out from under that water? That's the kind of fight you have to get off opioids, in my opinion.
It's so interesting because Shelby's this, seemingly straight-laced actress, helping special needs, and then,
Yeah. Well, I remember it always makes me cry. When I first met Ken, I remember he would have these erratic behaviors, which I was like, I don't know, like it was very hard to figure out. But he was a really good person and blah blah blah. And I remember saying to my best friend who I was living with at the time when we were dating, and I said, I'm like, this is so frustrating. I'm like, he is this aggressive kind of like really impatient. I'm like, but I said, I just see him as like a kindergartner, and he's the kid that's getting in fights at recess, and then he comes in and he's picked me, and he's like, hey, Mrs. Rideout, I have dandelions for you. You know what I mean? It's like this really, he was always this like really opposite thing. And so I couldn't let go of like, no, he's a really good person. There's just something going on. And it took me a long time to realize, like, is it mental health? Is it like, there was a point at which then I understood. I was like, okay, there's drugs. But even still, it was like, it's a long process. It's not just stopping the drugs. There's behaviors and everything else. And it takes a while, I think, for your mind to kind of resettle itself or find itself for the first time of different things. So it was rocky for me to try and figure out. But at the same time, I did have a nice upbringing. And so I don't pass judgment on people other than I remember saying to him, like when we first met, he was like really into money, and it was like embarrassing to me. Like, so he would like bought me Manolo Blahniks. Is that what I would say it wrong. Whatever. Those fancy shoes. Yeah. It was like $800 for shoes. And I was like, so I just returned them because they were just regular black pumps. And so I returned them. He's like, why'd you return them? I'm like, because you don't have to buy me, you don't have to buy me shoes. Like, and we would go out to dinner, and people didn't even do like the fake reach for the pocket. Like we went out with another couple. They just assumed Ken was paying. And I was like, these people aren't your friends. They're not. So he was really into all that stuff, and all this stuff. I remember saying to him, I go, I feel like you're supposed to live in the middle, but like you grew up really poor and kind of with some bad things. Then he went to London and was going on yachts and going to Monte Carlo. Then he started earning a ton of money. This before he met me. And then and I was like, I think you're supposed to live in the middle. It's really a fun place to live where everything's just moderate.
It took a
you know,
while to get to that point, though. When you're poor and you have nothing, and then you have money, like buying a Rolex watch and having a fancy car is how I tell the world, like, look how successful I am.
Yeah.
But it didn't take long for me to figure out, like, what the hell am I doing? I went for a job interview once at Credit Agricole at the French bank, and I had on a Rolex watch and Shamrock cufflinks, and the guy said to me, it was the best question. He said, "What says more about you, that watch or those cufflinks?" And I said, "Oh, that's a good question." I said, "I'm going to say the cufflinks because the watch just says I'm an insecure buzzard who wants you to know how successful I am. And the cufflinks kind of like Irish, represent where I'm from in Boston. They're antiques. I actually got them in there's a cool story behind them, and I'm really proud of them. So I'd say the cufflinks say more about who I am, like as a quality person, and the watch just tells you like, oh, this is an insecure guy who wants you to know he's successful." But it took a while to get to that point.
Wow. You didn't ditch him when you found out he was on drugs.
No, I will say when we dated, there was a number of makeups and breakups because I couldn't figure out, like, he's still not a great traveler. He's kind of impatient. And I'm like a special ed teacher. So I'm like, well, hey, we're fine. We'll get there, you know. Yeah. And so I remember driving one time, we were going somewhere on a vacation, we were dating, and I was like, this is not going to work. Like, he was just like a maniac, just like real. And there were drugs involved at that time.
I get very anxious about traveling. Not nervous. I'm just like, got to get there. We got to get there. They can't take our bags before we get off. Those bags are staying with me.
Yeah. I mean, it's so bad that, like, literally I had 4 kids, and I was like, hey, why don't you take a separate flight? I had like 4 kids under 5. I'm like, it's not a problem. We'll just meet you on the other end. I mean, and maybe call that enabling. It was really more for me. I'm like, I'm gonna have an awesome trip with four babies. It's easy compared to traveling with Ken.
Funny.
But so there were some makeup breakups. But there was like no choice. It was just like, well, this guy's a maniac. Like what? But no, and throughout our marriage, because so the drugs did continue into the marriage, but a lot of it's hidden behavior. So while I wouldn't say he thinks I'm naive. I'm actually not that naive. Like I was like, oh, like I said, yes, I've never seen cocaine in my life. And I think I saw, like, actually, I was 28 when I first smelled pot. I'm like, that's pot. Okay. Just think it's a skunk. Like, I just it took me years to recognize the smell of it and stuff. Because if I saw it, I was like, okay, no problem. I'm going, whatever. It's just not my thing. And I don't judge other people on different stuff. I mean, I don't think you're doing wild drugs, but I just do myself, So when in the marriage, it became, because I'm also like, one of how women can be like Dateline, NBC, and be like, I am an awesome sleuther. Yeah. So with him, like, so I've more than once gone like, what's this pill? And I'm on Google, round blue pill. What the hell is that? And even in times of things where he'll be acting weird, I'm like, what the hell? Let me super. And it's always like iron or, it's nothing. But there were years where every single time I went to go look, there was something. And it would be like, because I
wasn't a very good criminal.
I think getting off of opioids or any drug too, it's very seldom like, I quit and I can. And so for me, I'd say, like, well, when was the last time? So I smoked cigarettes in my 20s, which seems so crazy because no one smokes cigarettes anymore. And so, but I remember the feeling of cigarettes. I was like, I have an addiction to this. And I've always actually been grateful for that because it was a small window into what addiction is, where literally like, no, I'm done. Me and my best friend would like break our cigarettes. And the next morning you're rifling through the garbage can trying to find, a little butt of a cigarette, like disgusting behavior. And so with him finding things around, and then and so like an investigator where you lead them down, I'm like, oh, okay. Is it this? Or I go, what's going on with you? Nothing. I'm like, did you take anything? He's like, nope. And I go, did you take a Benadryl? He's like, yeah, I took a Benadryl. Now Dateline will tell you, all of a sudden you didn't take anything, and now I've given you an easy one. Oh, well, was it that? Because Benadryl, you're not going to get in trouble. Was it a Benadryl? Yeah. Oh yeah, I took a Benadryl. And I was like, got him. So it was, so I did become more savvy with it. And it certainly was frustrating. And I think if someone is not willing to change, he always wanted to change and always was trying different things. He just wasn't like consistent with therapy, whatever. And so I'm like, I'm in it for the long haul, but there's a point at which if you are going to continue to do things and it disrupts the children and different things. And also just as a loving partner, I'm like, it's very hard to see a partner who you're like, life could be so much better than what you're doing. This isn't working. It's not working for you. So I'm here to help you in any way. And that's why it was like, okay, I think that's probably why I enabled some of the running. Okay, well, he's out running. He's not, and he's really into this. He's really positive. He's feeling really good about it.
This is what I mean, though, about someone has to be ready to quit. Because even being browbeaten and caught lying all the time isn't enough. You have to come to the realization yourself. There's no like shortcuts. And I tried every, shortcut or get rich quick scheme to get sober, and there is none. There's only one way. And that's kind of why my mentality now of like this mindset of like, okay, it's time to go. Kill, kill, kill. That was the only thing that's the only approach that's worked for me in using the addiction as an example. Like that's the only way I could do it, is to like go into it super aggressively. Like I'm taking control of this. And that's the way I approach things that are important to me.
So interesting. It makes me think like, have we all been addicted, or are we all addicted to something? Right. And then this idea of a partner being an enabler, like I think probably all partnerships enable something. Are you enabling someone to be lazy and like not hold up their end of the bargain? Or are you enabling them to like figure out what their purpose in life is and get closer to that? Are you enabling them to work hard, or are you enabling them to be addicted to work? It's like this really interesting responsibility that we have, right? But I'm curious how Ken proposed.
My sister has a theory. I don't know how you guys proposed. I should ask that before I tell her theory.
I did it last minute. Did it on in the Cubs stadium, Wrigley Field.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So my sister has this theory, and I've seen it over, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree. Like, there's people like, we flew to France, and I got a hot air balloon. She's like, those marriages are always doomed. Like these huge proposals where the whole family was float. This is no offense to people. If you had that and it's working out, how lovely. So my parents live in Shelter Island, New York, and Ken wanted to go out there, so we were driving out, and he was literally going like 100.
I got a speeding ticket, lost my license for 60 days.
He was going, and he was going super, super fast. In his car, I couldn't necessarily tell, and we get pulled over, and he goes, hey, he turns to me and he goes, I go, oh, were you going fast? Clueless, are you going fast? He goes, yeah, listen, if he takes me away, just go to Shelter Island. It's going to be fine.
I was going so fast, I was like, he might arrest me.
Yeah.
I was going
and I go,
like
what are you talking about? He's just going to give you a ticket. He goes, I was going pretty fast. Like,
it was the dead of winter. We were driving out to the end of Long Island where our parents lived, like out in the Hamptons in Shelter Island. And her dad was leaving to go. He was writing a book, so he was going to the library. So I was trying to catch him before he left. So I get stopped, get the ticket. The guy didn't even give me a ticket. He's like, here's a summons, see you in court. He was pissed, and rightfully so. And so we go on, and Shelter Island's on an island, and you have to take a little ferry. As we're pulling on the ferry, there goes her dad driving away for the day. And I was going to ask him as soon as I got there, and then propose in the evening. Yeah. And he drove away, and I was like,
he goes, where's your dad going? I go, oh, I don't know. I think he's like writing a book. I think he goes to the library to do some research and stuff. And he's like, and I kept saying, we're hungry. Why don't we stop for lunch? He's like, no, we're going to your house. We're going to your house. When he sees my dad go, he's like, let's just stop for lunch. And he was like all dull. And anyway, so we went out to my parents' house. I took a nap, and he went to go ask my dad permission. And so my dad's like, oh, okay. And he goes, okay, well, if you guys want to look out the window, I'm going to go do it right now. Like Ken, and I think it was like 24 hours. Ken had bought the ring, yeah. So it was very quick in that regard. And so my parents live on the beach, and we went down, and we used to throw rocks and see who could hit the post with it and stuff.
There was piling out in the water, like, maybe like 30 yards out. So and it was a rocky beach, and we just stand there. I could stand down there and throw rocks at this thing for like 3 hours. Yeah. Just throwing rocks.
So I was picking up a rock, and he goes, Shelby, what do you think of this rock? And I turned around, and he was,
Nice.
It was like, no kidding. It was
freezing.
like 20 below zero. There was ice frozen all over on the water, which is a bay. So for it to freeze, it's cold.
Yeah.
So we were down there, and it was beyond cold. It was Arctic. I was like, come on, let's go walk down. She's like, it's freezing out. I said, put on your mom's fur coat. And we walked down there, yeah.
Do you have any nicknames, Ken?
No.
No nicknames?
Nope.
You don't have any nicknames?
For myself?
Do people call you anything?
All my kids have their own nicknames. Everyone in my life has a nickname from me, but none for me. But I don't have any problems if you want to call me a nickname.
No, I'm just curious. I love this bulldog approach. Like everything is like freaking like a Mike Tyson style. Like go get it.
I don't know if that's the best approach for everyone though, because I'd like to have some more like a little more peace in my life and a little more like chill.
Have you found that yet?
But
Sometimes I can be very zen, and I think I'm very like sensitive and affectionate and loving. if in the right environment. But the minute I feel I'm very insecure. So the minute I feel threatened, I'm like, oh, you think I'm a jerk? Watch this.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to give you a reason
he'll
not
out
to
jerk you
like
any
me.
day of the week. Yeah.
And that's a huge, that's something that I've got to work on. I let other people control how I see myself and how I act towards them versus just being confident and secure in myself. When I'm at my best, no one can affect me. When I'm at my worst, everything affects me.
But that's true of all of us, you know.
Well, self-reflection.
What were you gonna say, Shelby?
He dating wise, it was great. So, you know, when people are looking and doing dating apps and stuff and all these gameplay, he doesn't play games, which was so like I met him the next day. There were like flowers at my house, like, oh, I hope I get to see you again soon. Like which was really nice. I mean, take away the drugs and all the lying, it was great. But it was like, what's nice about Ken is like he's not fake at all. So like you'll know where you stand with him. And in business, he's very upfront with people. He's very ethical and stuff. So all of the stuff that matters is great. The thing that affects his behavior is insecurity, really, which is, again, I think is true of everybody. That it's, to me, it's the worst thing that we all have. And so even when you were talking about parenting, it's like he didn't come from maybe good examples. So how do you not pass that on? I think that you have to solve whatever's going on in you, and it will be more natural. You know what I mean? But if you're still going into parenthood with the trauma or whatever they experience, then that's going to get passed on even when you don't want it to. It's like alcoholism or anything, or abuse rather. You don't want to do it, but you do it until you have just focused within and figured out what fractures need to be fixed. And then I think parenting and being in relationships, I think that all becomes more of a natural thing.
I like how you said that. Yeah, because sometimes I have the thought of like, you can't always be thinking about you and your issues, but you said figure out what fractures you do. So have the look inside enough to figure out where you're broken. But then like, I think the process of repair is almost like you need to look outside. Like people talk about service or like helping, you know what I'm saying? It's like this interesting balance.
So is so I was in my 20s, you know, reading self-help books. And then there's a period where you're like, I need a break. It's too much. It's so ego focused a little bit at one point, and you go over the top. And the best, to me, I always tell my kids when I was going through miscarriages and my whole life, I always say, like, God tests you with what is the test for you. So for me, not working at, you know, Goldman Sachs, that wouldn't be a test for me. Math's not my thing. I'm not into business in that way. But if God was saying, hey, I don't think you're not going to be a mom, I was like, this is impossible. This can't be. And so it was a huge testing in my faith and everything else. And so my father took me for a walk at my best friend's wedding and was like, hey, and Ken was awesome during all that. Like, he was like, and I knew he wanted kids too. And he was like, it's okay. I married you. You know, like, it isn't, we can do whatever. But it was really an ego thing, not ego, partly probably, but like, I just felt like broken as a woman. And I just wanted so many babies. And my dad was like, this isn't fair. None of us know why this is happening to you, but it is what it is. And you just have to, you have a husband who loves you and you have to keep living. You have to. So my dad was saying, like, move your body. You have to move your body every day, which, you know, depression wise and all that. I lost my train of thought. That's what happens.
Looking outwards.
Oh yeah. And so I went back to, I did a half marathon once because I went and started running, and Ken's like, you got to sign up for a race. Otherwise you'll stop running. And I was like, no, I don't need to, but he's right. You almost have to have a goal because otherwise you'll run 3 days on the treadmill and be done. And I was like, no, I have this race I have to keep, which I did. But the other thing, I signed up for like Meals on Wheels, and I would go visit these old ladies. And it was, the gift really is to yourself. It is absolutely taking just all the focus off yourself and just saying, okay, I'm going to go paint these old ladies' nails and just talk to them, get them groceries, do whatever. And it completely switched everything for me.
Tell us about your app.
Oh, so I was an actress and an interpreter, and I was a private tutor for like 20 years in New York to subsidize the acting and the stuff. And so then I got my babies, and I was like, they called me for auditions. I'm like, yeah, great. And then I had my daughter Tensi, and I was like, I have an audition on Thursday. I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I had my daughter and my son almost immediately. We came home from Ethiopia in December, and my son was born in June. So I started out with 2 babies, which, by the way, one of my favorite things, they were in a stroller. She's Ethiopian, and my son is blonde and pale. More than once, I'd be double strolling it through New York, and someone's like, are they twins? And I was like, close, 11 months apart. Yeah. But anyway, so with them, in order to like take a shower or have a moment, I started making home videos of myself just doing sign and I wanted to teach them baby signs. So I was doing sign language and just kind of interesting things that kids would like. And so I would put that on knowing, oh, this is kind of language based and I'll go take a shower and they can watch this on the screen. Well, they started to read and do sign language at like a really young age. And so people would be like, oh my God, how did they learn that? And I was like, oh, I just have these videos. So people started asking me how they could buy them. I'm like, well, they're not for sale. So I ended up turning into a whole thing. I have like a sign language puppet, and it's just sort of this learning program that starts out with communication, so you can communicate and cut down on frustration and all that. But then it does introduce phonics and all this stuff, and so it's like the idea is to just, you're learning while having fun. It's not like, you got to learn and go to Harvard. It's just a very fun educational thing to put on that I've had hearing kids and autism kids and kids that just like, it's a nice calming thing that actually I have a lot of people are like, dude, it's like a baby whisperer that like just the sounds and everything would be like screaming. I have videos and the kids are like, oh, and but it's a really great program. And so now it's been made into an app. It's called Bright Sign. It's called Bright Signs Learning. And it's an app on Google Play and on Apple, and you can just download it and I don't even do a subscription thing. It may not be a great business plan, but I'm like, I just want people to be able to have it. And,
wow.
It's 4 videos, and then it has games, some games at the end as well.
That's awesome.
We'll link it down below too.
Yeah.
This felt like the most important conversation we've had.
I
had goosebumps multiple times.
You guys are very wise.
I don't always feel very wise. If we bring our kids, will be the best reflection. See that's how you can always tell how someone's doing. Bring their kids over here and let's see how they behave.
Yeah.
At least when we're in public, I know my kids are like very well behaved.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's always like such a source of pride. I'm like, yeah, they behave. They know.
I just remember my mom telling me as a kid, and it gets more and more true every year. It's like the best lessons in life, you'll unfortunately learn the hard way.
Yep.
And I just think it's refreshing. Honestly, I hate that you guys have gone through so much, but it's refreshing to hear it and to see people come through it because it just reminds us that we're human and
that
we
is
can
where
come out of it.
The faith too, like for me was having babies. For Ken, probably the addictions and stuff like that. But they always say it's like, well, I wouldn't trade it. I would never trade it.
That's what I was gonna say is that although you say like, I'm sorry you went through that, like I'm not sorry. Like I wish that I could have done things. I wish I could have like gone to Harvard, played in the NFL, been a professional fighter, that would have been great, but it wasn't. So I've taken what was given to me or what I deserve. I got what I deserved, and I've turned it into a positive. And the same thing, like, unfortunately, it took me 52 years to be recognized as an athlete, but to be recognized as an athlete and use the addiction as like a cautionary tale to help others, I can either like let it be a source of embarrassment and shame, or I can just use it as a teaching tool and show others like, hey, I know that some people are going to see this and be like, his addiction couldn't have been that bad. He seems to be okay now. But trust me, I was just an addict with means, so I didn't have to steal. I was like working in finance and making money so I could buy an entire bottle of prescription pills at a time for $3,000 and not think about it. But other people are out, robbing and stealing. But the addiction is the same. The end result is the same. I was in the same hole with the people, regardless of how everyone got their drugs, we were all in the same ditch together. And I just, at some point, was like, yeah, see you guys. I've had enough. Take care. Comb your hair.
Wow. I'm just curious. You guys have been in Nashville for 2 years, and we just freaking connected like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So don't know what's up with that, but glad to know you guys now.
Likewise.
Hopefully there's a lot more that we could glean from you in the future. But also, Ken mentioned that he has a podcast with Teddy Atlas. We'll link that in his social handle. Anything else that you want to talk about?
No.
As far as promoting anything? Okay.
No. I never have anything to promote. But I do have a podcast with Teddy Atlas called The Fight with Teddy Atlas.
Ken's a freak, so follow whatever he does. It's great. Glad to know you guys. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Extremely honored to be here.